Members, can I? Well, right. Sorry, didn't switch the mic on. Good morning. I will have to inform you we are live streaming and recording this meeting, which is in progress now. Could item 2, apologies for absence.
We have apologies from John Ritchie, Patrick James, Bob Marley, David Jeffers, and Christine Robertson. George DeBall will be joining later.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I should have said before. I welcome Katie Barnard, the Vera 2 internal audit manager, to our meeting. She's going to give the update, well, in a bit in time anyway. Minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of February 24. Has everybody read and digested? All okay? Thank you. Members are reminded it's their responsibility to declare the nature of any personal prejudice and or disclosable interests relating to any agenda item immediately prior to its consideration, and are encouraged to complete the written declaration using the form provided, which is this one. The emergency evacuation procedure, I haven't been told there's any fire drills, so if the fire alarms go off, we shall exit via the door here and congregate on the front lawn. Could I ask members for their approval of the exclusion of the public from the meeting during consideration of items 15-16 on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 1, 2 and part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972. Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, if we move on to item 7, the Corporate Risk Register. Ian will give us our update.
Thanks, Chair. I'll introduce this, then hand over to Simon. You'll be used to the normal corporate risk reports that we give you. I felt that it's only about 6 weeks since National Park Authority approved our risk register for the year. I wouldn't regurgitate that again, but I thought it would be useful to concentrate on what we felt was the highest level risk for us this year, and that was in relation to information security. So we've got a detailed report here about the work that Simon and his team are doing to keep us secure. So at this point, I'll look to my left, and Simon will just take us through it.
Yeah. So this is a report that I also presented to SLT a month or so ago. Just a bit of a look at the landscape as it is, and obviously there's been a couple of quite well documented cases in local government, Redcar and Cleveland being one closest to us, and there was a Welsh National Park that also were hit with cyber incidents over the last, I think the Redcar and Cleveland one was just before COVID, so 2019, early 2020. And it's just to highlight that actually the way the landscape has changed with IT security and cyber is that you can put a lot of protection in place, and we have, but it's also having that assurance that if the worst does happen, that we're confident that we've got the systems in place to recover as quickly and cost effectively as possible. The Redcar and Cleveland incident was just one laptop and one user, one laptop, one email that they opened. It had malware. It encrypted it spread from that laptop to all the other devices, including servers and including their backup infrastructure. And so it was a major incident for them, which they did recover from, but not without significant cost and reputational damage. So what are we doing at the moment? Quite a lot. obviously the landscape's changed since COVID and the way people work. We're a much more mobile IT infrastructure now, so lots of laptops, very few PCs. Yeah, I think in here we've got something like 206 Windows devices, 62 Android devices, and 2 Apple Macs across the estate that we're managing, and using various AV, antivirus and anti-malware products and pieces of admin consoles to manage that. I won't go too much into the technical detail of it all because it'll all glaze over. But the biggest area and the main area that these sort of these attacks target is through email, and that one email that comes through that the user doesn't necessarily spot. In here, I think just in a typical month, we're processing something like 100,000 emails have been fired towards us or we're sending out. Our first line of defence, which is Mimecast, rejected over 25,000 of those emails in March. And then we've still got another 2 lines of defence in Exchange Security and Microsoft Defender. We do carry out regular testing of users, with sending out spam style emails, which then report back to us through a security console of how users reacted to those. Did they delete them? Did they report them? Did they open them? Did they click on the link? And it automatically assigns training to those that do fail those tests. And we regularly monitor that to see if there's any sort of repeat offenders and whether we need to take further action in terms of additional training from that. What we're planning to do over the next year, 6 months, years, with update of our DR, business continuity documentation. Obviously, like I've already alluded to, the landscape has changed in IT and the way that the authority works. So it's just making sure the documentation follows that. So that will be getting done over the next few months. We've also had a major overhaul of our backup infrastructure, which was actually we did the start of that work was last Thursday with our third-party consultant. Had a day putting in a load of new kit, which again makes us more secure. We're also going to use that third-party consultant to help monitor our backups and make sure that they are backing up as they should, and that we can recover whole systems, not just files, quickly, and produce some timings around how quickly we can do that over the next few months. And then various other bits in here about the things we've got in place, like multi-factor authentication, so that when somebody signs in from a location that isn't our office, it should challenge them for either to receive a text message or to approve an authentication through an authenticator app, which again reduces that threat of if somebody has got somebody's username and password and they try to log in from somewhere that's not our corporate network, it should challenge them and stop them getting in. So just that it's fairly standard now, but having that level of protection in place is sort of key. And I think that probably summarises the report. So really, it's just any comments or questions or anything like that.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. It is to me absolutely mind-boggling. This how many emails and how many is rejected before you even get to them, you know. But anyway, you know, I'm proud that you're here and looking after us, because we'd be certainly in drink if I was in charge. But any questions? Go on, Heather.
Yeah, really more comments. I mean, just exactly what Colin said. It's essential, Simon, that you're on the ball with it, and you know, to make sure there's things in place to recover the backup systems. I mean, I'm quite sure, as Clive will know, one of our senior counsellors at risk last week from a dodgy email. Thankfully, only one person responded to it, but that could have been a very serious matter. It's an ongoing thing. There's no question about it that sadly the people out there will try and break anything they can. It's what they do all day. So it's not a question you are going to continue with this, but it's to make sure we've got the availability to be able to put things in place, you know, till we can recover quickly. And thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that, Sam. Just one thing, I mean, it's reassuring all the work that you're doing, so that's excellent. just one little point that intrigued me. 25,000 emails got rejected at the first level. What did you do with those 25,000 emails then?
Yeah, I mean, the way the system works, it's if it picks them up as spam or phishing or whatever reason for it's being rejected. Most of the reason is because the address where it comes from is on a blacklist somewhere. They sit in on that Mimecast system for 7 days and then get deleted.
Oh, I see.
So they're automatically deleted. It's not.
So it was just rubbish that came in, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Thanks.
So if on our North York Moors account we get an email that gets put into that place, do we know about it?
The majority of ones at that point, no, you probably won't. If the system is clever enough that if for some that it will put into a spam junk folder for you to have a look at to say whether you think it's genuine or not, and you will get an email at that point to say you've got emails in that need to be checked. But the majority, the well-known blacklist sites that they just block automatically.
Go on, Clive.
I've just got one question. If we did get hacked but really badly, have we got backup, paper backup or anything like that, just in case we need to contact?
Yeah. So at the moment, we have a DR document that has key contact details in it. Again, it needs to be checked and updated for some of the key contacts because systems have changed. But that's part of this report is that we're building all that now or overhauling it all now. Yeah, and we have. I mean, our backup infrastructure consists of our 365 SharePoint stuff is backed up to a third party. We've then got physical backup to SAN storage, it's called, and then we've still got physical backup to tape, which is kind of the old traditional way of backing up, which you then take what looks like a cassette and then put that in a safe somewhere, so that's physically removed, so that then if we do lose a lot of data to a cyber attack, those physical tapes are they're taken away from the system. So if it corrupts everything else, you should still have those documents and that file and that tape drive sat in a safe somewhere.
Right, thank you. I know when I get some emails in, is it if you press on details, if you don't show, and then it comes up with some gobbledygooch on top as to where it come from, I take it that's telling you that this is spam or somebody up to no good anyway. But no, that's it's brilliant to know that we're so much looked after, and I'm pleased that you know all that's going on, because yeah, it is these computers and everything else. I wasn't taught them at school, sort of thing, and I've picked up bits that why these guys that want to hack your accounts don't get a decent job, and they could get paid well for it, like, couldn't they? To be fair, but anyway, any more questions?
Yes, I mean, not so much a question, but I think anybody who's had a chance to see the video that Redcar Cleveland Council put together with support from local government association, you'll have seen quite tellingly the not only the kind of incursion routes that led to the problem and the risks that are associated with that, and how important it is that we're all really careful and invest in training, but also the importance that they stressed in terms of the lessons that they learned on disaster recovery as well. And so the point that Simon makes about updating our disaster recovery plans, I think, is really important in all of this, because even though we feel like we are doing some of the right things as a relatively small public body, but no less at risk of being targeted. Equally, we need to be mindful of the fact that at some point there's every chance that we could be vulnerable, and therefore we do need to make sure that as a public-facing organisation that we're not only focusing on risk management and mitigation, but also how we deal with the day one thereafter, if and hopefully touch wood, never when something does happen. So I do think it's really important to stress that to members as well. When you get a cyber attack, are the attacks pointed at disruption, or are they for total or to try and get details? Which is the most common?
I would say the most common now is around ransom. So the look to encrypt to then say we can unencrypt it for a fee, which most organisations don't ever pay, I think. But that's the most common reason for why people are trying to do this sort of thing.
Going back 9 years perhaps, we were at a steel business, we were affected and we got a ransom thing. Thankfully, we managed to find something in the cupboard that we could use for all our machines. It affected the whole of the operations, what we did. Yeah, they go for the money, don't they? That's what the answer is. Anyway, thank you.
Are you carrying on with the risk register now, or was that all?
No, what we'll do at the next meeting is at the next meeting we'll report back on the suite of risks that that we presented to National Park Authority. So we'll update on all of them, but we just felt this was of sufficient importance to merit a paper of its own.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah. If we can move on to item 8, and I'll introduce Katie to give the internal audit. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. So I'll keep it fairly brief, and then people can ask any questions they might have at the end. But as you can see, our overall assurance rating this year was substantial, so that's the highest that we give. So that was good. There was nothing of any sort of key significance highlighted this year. We looked at payroll and pensions, and we found that generally everything with the payroll was operating effectively. The only sort of areas for improvement were related to exception reporting. So there was no documented exception reporting, which would highlight any sort of key changes month on month. And although the finance officer does check the payroll, and it wasn't authorised or documented that she was doing that. So they were the only sort of areas within that one. We also looked at procurement, and we found that training was adequate. We found waivers were approved properly and according to procedure. There was a couple of areas for improvement. The first relating to the evidence that we could see to show that procurement exercises were done in line with procedure. But through discussion with officers, it came to light that this was generally due to the externally funded projects and how they might be slightly different. So it was agreed that the procurement rules would be updated slightly to reflect those different ways of working. And also the centralised contract register is going to be put into place, as it wasn't at the time of the audit. And again, a centralised register of waivers, because although the waivers were approved in accordance to procedure, it was just that evidence of them being in a centralised location. And then the monitoring and management of spend with suppliers, just evidence that that's been monitored to highlight any areas where a contract may provide better value and things of that nature. Budgeting was generally fine. There was nothing of key significance highlighted there, just around the formal timetable for budget setting, just to put that document in place so that everyone's sort of running to the same timescales, although the testing found that they were anyway. It's just having that formalised documentation. And then finally, transparency. This was an audit that Ian and Pete kind of came up to us at the beginning of the year and said this is something that they wanted audit to help with, as they knew that there was a few gaps. So the audit just highlighted where those gaps were, and it was generally around allocated responsibility to individuals to update the information, and ensuring that all of the compulsory areas did contain an up-to-date amount of information. So yeah, that's pretty much everything. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer anything.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
It's okay.
Have we got questions? Heather, go on.
Thank you. Obviously, there's a few little things in there to do with training. One bit to do with possibly some training for financial regulations where appropriate. I mean, I'm not aware, I've never seen this before, but obviously it's something that you think need addressing. I'm also looking at the contract register for
Yes.
all staff to complete basic details when they have a contract over 10,000. I mean, yeah, I think that's very important. I mean, I don't know how many members of staff have that right, but I think that's essential that we have that, and it hasn't been in place before. And that figure, 10,000. Do you think that is the right amount? Do you think it's £10,000? I mean, obviously it's coming for us to decide, but you're happy with that then?
Yeah, that's sort of seems like an amount that would want that extra monitoring in a centralised register. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. As a general principle with internal audit, while it's good to have confirmation that we're doing some things well, I generally feel that the process isn't very helpful if we just direct Katie and a team towards things we know we're doing really well. We need them to have a look at the stuff that we're not so good at. We're putting in place actions to deal with all the areas of improvement, so we're well on with that. I think procurement offers up some opportunities for us to potentially save a little bit of cash by being better organised. For example, we can have multiple officers using the same contractor at different points during the year, and if we can find a way of pulling together that sort of information, we can let one larger contract, which should be more cost effective for us. So a typical example might be things like cutting back vegetation as we move through spring and summer. We'll have people in the ranger team, conservation team, national trails team, all independently working with the same contractor. So there's an opportunity there for us to pull that together into one bigger contract and potentially save ourselves some money and give a contractor security that they know they've got a reasonable size contract with us through the summer. So there's some stuff there. On the transparency data, I knew we weren't great at any of this, and there is a set of information that we should provide on our website. Some of it we do, some of it we don't do, but I think that the real failing was we'd not actually said to any member of staff, do you know what, it's your responsibility to make sure that this it is all on. So again, we're now rectifying that, so that should be right. But overall, the process has been really helpful, and we should get some lasting benefit from it.
Thank you, members. Go on, Malcolm.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, overall it's an excellent report, isn't it? Because the main areas that you picked up on are the ones that we asked you to pick up on in any case. So, and apart from that, everything else is subject to, some minor but important improvements. I mean, overall the report is really good, so it reflects well on all the staff that are here listening. So thanks to them.
Right, Jim.
So it was just a bit of a silly question. I was looking at your payroll and pensions and improvements. It just says that exception reports to be run for each payroll. But what do you mean by an exception report?
So it would basically be a sort of typical one would show variances from 1 month's pay run to the next. So it would highlight those that might have been paid more or less than the previous pay run. So it could highlight if there was an error. Yep.
Or if somebody who's part-time increases their hours and will be paid a lot more the next month, we would just highlight that as, well, person A was paid £1,000 last month, they paid £2,000 this month. Are we happy that that just is, that isn't an error on processing payroll, that there is a good reason behind that? So every month there are perhaps half a dozen or 8 changes in pay. That what we now do is just pull out those 8 people and just say, are we happy that we've made a change rather than making a mistake on the payroll? And it's as simple as that. And it's a cross-check from Claire, our payroll officer, that's then signed off by me.
Okay, so it's just a trawl through to find figures that stand out and might need further investigation.
It is.
Okay, thanks for that.
And you put that more succinctly than I did.
Have we any more questions? Katie, you've sorted us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all your work and diligence in looking through our business and everything else. And thank you very much. And I'm pleased we have got such a cracking report. And thank you.
No problem. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, gentlemen, ladies. Sorry, I nearly missed it, Heather. If we move on to item 9, the financial outturn report. Pete, I'll let you fill us in on this.
Okay, thanks, Chair. There's a presentation for this, so I'll just wait till it comes up and hope the clicker works so that I can work through it. Right, so first slide, just looking at the outturn in terms of the table that's in the report, just that kind of high level. And that just shows that we've got a 301k surplus on the bottom line, which is 223k higher than we were saying at Q3. And the slides will go through some of the reasons for that. And also just indicating the original budget as well. And the paper does a lot of comparisons to original budget, just so a reminder to see where we came from the start of the year to the outturn as well. So 301k variance after proposed carry forwards equates to about 2.5% of total expenditure, actual total expenditure in the year. And there's a proposal in the paper to distribute that 201,000 to the property reserve and 100,000 to risk reserves. And the main driver between now and the end of year, between Q3 and the end of year, is really around improved income performance in a number of areas, and then a few smaller areas of expenditure as well. And again, the following slides will go through some of the detail of that. And a note there that expenditure is 1.8 million lower than anticipated at Q3. The biggest driver of that is around the externally funded projects and Section 106. And whilst that doesn't come out in the surplus on the bottom line, obviously that is a number that we should take note of in the paper and the presentation. And again, I'll be covering that in the slides that follow. So this is a slide around just the earned income performance. I think this is always an important area to go over. It's one of our big risk areas in terms of potential sort of deficit areas, and one that we really try and focus on. And I think you can see here that we've got sort of 78k improvements around our earned income from Q3 to the end of the year. And a considerable improvement from the original budget as well. So a lot of that comes from investment income. We've got car parking. I think car parking is always one of our sort of concern areas. I know in recent years we've often come short of that target. So I think it's really good progress that actually we've exceeded that target. A big part of the year-on-year jump is the tariff increase as well that we implemented at the beginning of April. So we can see now that we've got a really, really good performance across our car parks, which is driven from 2 or 3 of our core car parks, Newton and Rosebery, Sutton Bank and Saltergate have all performed really well in the year. planning. So you remember going back to Q1, we had a big concern around planning income, and we expected a very, very sizable reduction this year. It's improved throughout the year, which is really good news, including in Q4. Coming out at 233,000 in total, but the original budget was 299. So you can still see there's that decrease, which is a nationwide decrease in planning, but we have seen recovery over the year, which is good news. In terms of retail sales, so you'll see that's the one that is down, but actually on the cost of sales side, the expenditure side, which we'll come to, there's actually a 49k underspend. So there's overall a margin 16k improvement there. I'll come to it when we come to expenditure, but it's a bit of work we need to do about retail to really get an understanding of that. And investment interest has really driven the increase over the original budget. So the increase in Bank of England rates that we've seen over the course of the year since we set the budget has really driven that investment income upwards, including positive cash balances as well. So we set that originally at 150,000 at the start of the year, and it's come in at, I think it's about 390, so 380, 390. So really improved performance, about £225,000 worth of improved performance on investment interest. And at the beginning of the year, we used the bit that we knew about at Q1 to help offset that planning performance. But with planning and the outdoor learning performance both coming back into line over the course of the year, that's helped free up some of that investment interest excess. We've then got expenditure against the core DEFRA grant and earned income. So you'll see from the start table, we've got a saving of 99,000 against Q3 predictions compared to that. And a big chunk of that is the cost of sales for retail that I mentioned before, which is 49,000 lower. I think we need to get a little bit more of an understanding about exactly what sales are coming through and what cost of sales is coming through within retail. There's a project to do that at the moment. And I think that's something we could have been sharper at Q3 to really understand the margin of that area. Utility costs were lower, so you remember that we signed a new agreement that increased utility costs considerably around October time by about 150%. That's made it quite hard to predict with that in-year change, and also with the decarbonisation of visitor centres and really understanding the impact of going from the boilers, gas boilers, to the air source heat pump systems that we've got in now. So that's made that quite difficult to kind of understand at Q3, but there is actually an 18,000 saving across all of that this year, and we'll have a look at next year and just really understand what that looks like against next year's budget setting for Q1. We've made a saving of 8,000 on the Danby lease agreement, so within the course of Q4, after Q3, we've managed to renegotiate the Danby lease on Danby Lodge. So that's generated an 8,000 saving in the second half of last year, which we wouldn't have known about at Q3. And then we've also, this is one of the bigger numbers, got 55,000 of them forecast savings, which has come as a result of actually some of our externally funded projects funding some of our core resources. So I guess this is income in a sense, but it's also, I guess it's expenditure on the flip side. So part of this comes through farming and protected landscapes and some of the external funding route. And some of this comes through actually offsetting some of our core resources, our core expenditure. So this is where we've got 4 areas in particular, actually. One is farming and protected landscapes, which agreed to in Q4 to fund some of our core staffing. We've also received new burdens grants for biodiversity net gain, which we ought to have known a little bit about at Q3 and we didn't forecast for. But that's helped offset some of the core resources we've got that have gone into that project. And then we've got 2 or 3 different externally funded projects which are now agreed in year, including Peatland, and some of those signed up this year to fund some of our core, which is really good news, but we didn't pick that up in the forecasts. So I think this is just an area for us to sharpen up on a little bit and just make sure with this kind of new progressing element to external funding that they are starting to fund our core, that we really pick up on that as we forecast through the year. And that's offset by lower vacancies. So throughout the year, we've got that vacancy factor saving of about 2% on core funded posts. That's been really low turnover throughout the year, and that's continued. And you'll have seen that in some of the scorecard stats around turnover, that's really very, very low this year. So good insofar as we don't have the turnover of staff, but actually much lower than we've seen in previous years in terms of that turnover level. And then just a note underneath around some of the carry forward proposals. So the surplus is noted after carry forwards, and one of the appendices has the carry forwards in it to the value of 91,000. And I've just listed them there, that these are kind of the ongoing projects which are currently going or we're looking just to carry forward those budgets to help fund those next year where they've overlapped into the second year. So we've already heard a little bit about cyber this morning. Design code, which is a project which is ongoing at the moment. Some fencing work on Levisham. Lastingham project, which again is continuing to next year. Training, which was a bit of an underspend in the training budget, but we know next year we do have quite a big demand from a leadership development programme that's been put in place. And then the planning underspend. So planning had quite a big underspend in their legal and consultancy fees budgets, professional fees budgets. That's been put forward to two areas. One is a potential legal case next year, so it's just to help support that and any upfront costs we may need for that. And the other one is around looking at potential parking solutions for Osmotherley. So they're the carry forward proposals, which is one of the recommendations in the paper. Moving on to externally funded projects. So this is an area where we've seen quite a sizable reduction compared to Q3 in the total expenditure that we anticipated. So we anticipated overall just over 4 million of spend, and it's come through at 2.842. That's a very similar level to the previous year at 22-23, and it is above target, but obviously disappointingly below where we anticipated it would be. And I think the main projects that drive that are shown below. And again, I think this is an area just from a forecasting perspective, we need to just sharpen up on a few areas, really get sort of less optimism maybe in the spend of those budgets. These are multi-year delivery, so these are projects that have an end date, the first two at the end of next year. And I think we just need to get a little bit less optimism bias, and also be bringing those forward a bit of the Q reporting. So I just think we need to sharpen up a little bit. I think on the peatland restoration, you can see that's the sort of really big driver of the 1.1 million underspend. That's due to end at the end of next year, so all funds still expected to be delivered. And it's sort of the time it's taken to get landowner agreements in place with Forestry England at the front end of that project that has kind of pushed that spend backwards. But I think when you see the external funding paper later, and actually a lot of this spend is going to get pushed to next year, we've got a very, very big amount of spend next year. So we really need to make sure that we are delivering, because actually we push back and we have to make almost 6 million of spend next year now. Revitalise, again, in the paper, it covers the delay in the spending there. Farming and protected landscapes is a little bit more expected, I think. We didn't say that Q3 because at that stage it's very hard to predict actually what the slippage in projects may be or what the end pipeline looks like. But that was a little bit more anticipated. And then the LEIs, I think, again, an area that maybe just with that little bit more focus at Q3, we might have predicted the underspends on those. But weather has also certainly had an effect, certainly on things like the coast to coast, some of the works on coast to coast, and the weather and the rain has meant a delay to some of those works. But they're all queued up for the first quarter of this year. So again, not a concern in one or two areas where the weather's impacted, but just a couple of areas that we just need to be a bit sharper on the forecast.
Just before I lost that, on that slide, I think the thing that concerns me a bit about that is some of those projects are, not even 50% of what was expected. If Schiphol, for instance, 150 short of $1 million sounds okay, but the ones where they haven't even spent half of it, what was going on?
I think it's a good question. I think our phasing should be really, and that's why this is on here, I guess. In terms of looking at some of those, so the LEIs were just ones that I think as officers haven't been phased as they ought to have been. I think we probably ought to have known that the delivery would be longer term than that. And I think in one of those instances, actually, it won't fully spend now.
I won't say the game, but if you haven't got halfway, something's wrong.
Yeah, there's also, I guess, there's also something about spend versus actual project progress as well. So financials aren't the only indicator of how far projects maybe progress. So for example, on peatland restoration grants, the spend hasn't come yet because of the amount of work to put the landowner agreements in place. I guess one of the things we need to look at is whether we're over optimistic about the length of time it would take to actually get those land in place, because actually the spend doesn't happen until they are. But each of these projects really needs to be dug into to really understand the nature of that, whether the progress is, whether we were over optimistic, whether we simply didn't forecast as we ought to have done, and actually what the implications are for that. What are the risks? And I think this is one of the big things really. Something like peatland, for example, so it delivers by the end of next year. So the reality of taking longer to put landowner agreements in place how much pressure does that put on actually getting the spend out the door, which is always going to be the second half of the project after the agreements are in place. What does it mean for the timeline? And I think that's really where as officers we have to dig into that, but also probably where we need to put a little bit more in the FRAS reports that come quarterly around the external project progress on the financial front, so that can actually be monitored a bit more quarterly, and we get a bit more tight around it, including reviewing when the end dates are and where those pressures are in terms of delivery, really understanding where those risks sit. So Section 106 agreements, I think on Woodsmith agreements, I think broadly good news. I think on the front page it said 0.6 underspend on Section 106, which is true, but I'm less concerned by this because the majority of that's in core policy D and the rest of that is delivered in April, May. I think the wet weather, particularly in Q4, has just meant a month or two's delay on the final spend aspects of that, including incentive payments, which come at the end of each delivery. But overall, core policy D has delivered 125 hectares, which is a phenomenal result. And I think on all of the other areas, with the exception of monitoring, you can see that they've overspent their in-year allocation, or spent or overspent their in-year allocation, which I think is really good news. Core policy D is just one of those where the weather has resulted in a month or two's delay, but the delivery level of hectares and also delivering them still at a lower cost per hectare than is in the budget is good news. On Bulby took a little while to get put in place at the front end, so we're now into that runs on it's worth remembering, January to December year, financial year for that particular agreement, which is different to our financial year. But that is at the moment 465k spent against 880, and I think it's just one we need to closely monitor because there is a little bit of catch up to do in Bulby just to get everything in place at the front end. We now just need to make sure that over the course of this year that one does start to progress. Quick note on reserves, split into 4 categories. Restricted reserves is the main reason for the increase in reserves. That's the ones that are where we've had money in advance around Section 106 agreements or around externally funded projects, so very much ring-fenced against those agreements. Our risk reserves remains the same, although there is a proposal in the recommendations to put 100,000 additional into that. Capital smoothing reserves, they're the ones for IT, vehicles and property. And I think the main one there is just it has increased, but we are going to have to replace our pool cars. We had anticipated we may be doing that by now, but we are holding back to replace them with electric vehicles, which will come at additional cost, but that will probably come with the property move when we have the infrastructure to be able to charge. And a couple of notes, risk reserves currently at 8.3% of expenditure level, but that's the reduced expenditure level for this year. Next year we expect that level to increase. So that percentage will go down, and we need to continue to bolster work towards that 10% mark that we've put in the medium-term financial strategy. Smoothing reserves funds the replacement programme, and restricted reserves, again, that ring-fence spend. So that, I guess, takes us actually to the end of the performance for the outturn, the 23-24 outturn, but also included in this paper is the additional funding from DEFRA for 24-25. So slightly distinct insofar as for this financial year. We would have ideally brought this to the budget papers at NPA in March, but at that point we didn't have agreements in place or confirmed for the 500,000. This is the first opportunity to bring this here. The appendices has this table, which is a group of proposals brought by directors for how we might spend this money, and just a reminder that it's split half and half revenue and capital. So in the early stages we thought it would be all capital funding, but actually that got changed, so it's half revenue, half capital. And I think the spend has to be spent by the end of 24-25, March 24-25. Hence why we're bringing it to here, because we want the earliest opportunity to try to get approval so that people on the ground can start these projects rolling and give the time to deliver by the end of March. And I think DEFRA will be monitoring this through the year, through sort of quarterly updates to make sure that spend is on track, but also if there's any potential to underspend, they can effectively reallocate that to other landscapes because it is very much in 1 year only funding. So these are the proposals. These were all the proposals brought by directors, with only 1 or 2 exceptions that were taken out purely because they were self-funding. But otherwise, these are all the ones that were brought forward. And I think I'll come back to that slide, but for recommendations, there are 4 in the paper. 1 is to note the report and the outturn report as per usual, to approve the carry forwards laid out in section 12, to approve the use of the 301k surplus laid out in section 13, and then for members to approve the use of the 500k additional DEFRA funding in Appendix 4. So I'm happy to go back to any slides as anybody wants on the screen, but hand over to members to discuss.
Right, members, it's up to you. To be fair, there was just one on Bowlby. Is it possible to fetch their year end in line with our year end? Because it must be difficult when you have so many different year ends to work into our year end sort of thing, which, you know, it's not the best way of, it's just much more work on you, isn't it? Sort of trying to work out who's what and where.
Yeah, but
where spend is.
It does tend to line up with the agreement. So Woodsmith is the same in that it runs May to April. So 1 month out of kilter, and Bowlby from January to December. I guess what we have to do as officers is recognise that we report on our spend in our financial year, but officers who are working specifically on those agreements are sometimes working in the Section 106 year. So we just have to bridge and understand the difference between those two when it comes to reporting the numbers. But actually, if we're reporting April to March, generally speaking, that's a year's worth anyway. So if you take Woodsmith, for example, there might be sort of a bit more spend in April, but that should be at the front end as well. So it shouldn't really make too much difference from our reporting point of view. We should be able to understand it from a financial year point of view too. I think the thing with, yes, we do have to report 3 different kind of reports over different time frames at times, and officers working on those areas will sometimes be working January to December in their mind in terms of that might be the hectareage delivery. We just need to interpret that from a financial year point of view. So in terms of changing it, I think we did look at that for Woodsmith once, but I don't think we ended up proposing changing it. And I think it comes with a lot of difficulties of having then a shorter period year and things like that, and it has to line with Section 106 agreement. So I think there are limitations to how much we can change that. But we ought to be able to simply just translate that into our financial year reasonably.
Okay. Just before I open it up, the other one was electric vehicles. That I take it those are just cars rather than the industrial vehicles, because they can't get too far with those at the moment, can you? Not to work properly. You know, is that the case?
Yeah, at the moment. So I think we'll always be looking at what technology is available that's climate change friendly, and I think we would always look to convert to that where we can. Pool cars are the obvious example at the moment. We have diesel vehicles, and we would look to change those because they're exactly the kind of vehicles that are the right ones to be moving for that. At the moment, some of the more it's more difficult with some of the vehicles we have in fleet for like rangers and that working sort of in the field. But we will always look at the technology that's available, I think, at the time and see what we can do. We should always try to maximise conversion where we can. But yes, there are some limitations, absolutely.
Right, members, I'll open it up to you. Anybody want to bring anything? Malcolm?
Yeah, as usual, really good report. Really detailed. I think last year, did we refer this report to the True Forum on the basis that there's some really interesting stuff in here that from a scrutiny point of view, the forum could... I had a feeling we did, but or did a dream it. It just struck me that, well, I'll leave it to the chairs of the forum to look at that, but it just occurred to me that there's some interesting detailed things in here that aren't appropriate necessarily for this meeting, but the forum may want to pick up on. So I'll just leave that to for you to take up with the forum people. I mean, the more general thing is, yeah, there's a couple of shocks in this a bit, isn't there? And therefore, the question is sort of to what extent should we anticipate it and shouldn't we? And I think the bottom line for me, it seemed to be, because I went through the report and looking at all the details things, and then seeing how we got to why did that number go up from 78 to 300 sort of thing. And it seems to be that it's both the interest is higher, and we managed to get some money from back into the core budget were the two main points. And it just seemed to me that they were the sorts of things that shouldn't have been big surprises. So I think there's some lessons to be learned.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and that is absolutely the take that I would kind of expect here on the year-end position. I think that 301 surplus, we've always said we don't want the hockey stick where it's 2 to 4, and I think in the last couple of years we've kind of not had that. I think what we look for is where we've got optimism bias, and I think what we probably don't have here is optimism bias, but maybe a couple of elements that have been missed. So I'm kind of reassured in a way that, not looking at external funding here, but looking at the kind of core spend earned income, we don't really have optimism bias in there, but you mentioned a couple of areas there. Investment interest, we've probably been a little bit cautious, I think, potentially around the investment interest number. And I think with the externally funded core, there's certainly probably about half of that we ought to have certainly known something about at Q3, I think. And then we mentioned a couple of other areas there as well, retail, for example, that maybe we ought to be sharper on as well. So I certainly think there's some areas. What I would say is I don't think in those areas it's come from optimism bias. It's more come from sharpening up on a couple of areas and maybe being a bit less cautious around investment income. Where I think there is something is external funding, which doesn't necessarily pop out on the bottom line. And in some ways, maybe we focus on what comes out on the bottom line. We need to maybe look a little bit closer at that, and particularly around whether we have optimism bias in the spend profiles on that. So that would probably be, we've got 3 or 4 areas I think to sharpen up focus in the other area for next year. And then on external funding, I think we need to sharpen up on profiling and phasing of spend and making sure that we are really comfortable that we're going to spend and we're not being overly optimistic. And the impacts of that, then the knock-on effects of that.
That was going to be the other point, because I mean, Jim highlighted it as you went through it, but by not spending quite a lot this year, as you say, that there's a huge amount for next year, isn't there? And it just strikes me that if you're telling us you didn't spend it this year and you're going to spend this huge number next year, there's a big question mark in my mind. I don't know whether the answer is you can roll it forward so it's not a big issue, or it's not going to work out. And I don't need the answer now, but I'm just commenting just the obvious point.
Yeah, I mean, I can respond to that in terms of absolutely when we push spend back. At the moment, we haven't pushed anything back in terms of the deadline for spending that. So there is 6 million to spend next year in the profile, which does put pressure on it. And whilst officers are comfortable at the moment they can deliver that, we need to make sure both as a leadership team and then bringing to FRAS that we have that monitored, so that can be monitored by both members and officers alike. What I would say about the 301 surplus is ultimately that's been kind of driven by, we do have 220,000 of interest extra this year in the medium-term financial strategy we've capped next year, so that kind of one-off nature of income we can actually use then specifically for project delivery. So overall, with it being income and things like that, I think the bottom line of 301, the fact that we can allocate it, is not necessarily a negative thing, but because it's income performance that's done really well. But equally, we could just have been tighter on the forecast and had that more predicted. Because I think when we looked at Q3, we had 78k on the bottom line. We weren't proposing to redistribute that for spend. We did say at that time, actually, that's recovering investment interest that was going to get used for planning income default. We can actually allocate that to reserves, and that's useful. So 78k, we were planning to do that rather than spend anyway. But absolutely, that number's jumped up. But it is income performance that's driving it, which I think is a positive thing, but I would rather have been closer to the forecast at Q3 in terms of those maybe 50, 60, 70,000 pounds worth of stuff that would have made that number more like 150 at Q3 rather than the 78 that it was.
Would be nice.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of proposals, the 500, I know you've all discussed it as a senior management team group, and I mean, I'm fine with that. Quite happy to support that. It's a nice little windfall that they gave us, and we're spending it well. So.
Yeah, thanks very much, Pete. I mean, obviously, the chair, myself, as vice chair, we've been through the report, and I've got to say it's pretty good information there. And really, I'd just like to recommend that we approve what's on 20.1, 2, 3, and 4, and approve the contents, the budgets forward, and approve the 301k surplus and the 500k additional money from DEFRA. I would like to recommend that we approve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Just one thing before I go on and get second that proposal. There was 4k down for the car park replacement wall at Saltersgate. Do you think the wall will stay there this time? I mean, there was a lot of concrete in it last time, and we still managed to to dissect it and make a mess of it.
I think that question's beyond the realms of my financial knowledge, I'm afraid. But yeah, obviously we're building the wall, we'll build the wall as in a good quality, and then
Jim, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so just before you get to recommendations, I did have a few questions, Chair, and there's all sorts of stuff. Leaving aside the Section 106 and project funding, except what I would say about that is that's where we make a difference on the ground, isn't it? You know, we're not going to fall short on core costs and wages, are we? But where we make a difference on the ground, it is that stuff that we're delivering, and so you know that's quite a loss, if you like, to what the national parks work should end up as. But hopefully we'll catch it up. And as Malcolm says, you know, I think monitoring some of those we talked about it. What was it in the wages? You know, one of those reports that highlights the figures that look wrong. And I'm sure that the forum might like to have a look at some of those to understand how it's going mid-year. So turning back to the underspend and the windfall, again, it's good to be in the position that we've got 800,000 to spend that we didn't expect to, and I don't think, as Heather said, I don't think there's any point in delaying that. But I do wonder whether we haven't had. It would have been really good to have had better account of that setting our budget back in spring, wouldn't it? Because you know this is to come in on top of the budget that we've set, and it's a significant chunk of money. And so I'm thinking about it. You know, maybe although we didn't know we were going to get the 500k, we sort of did, and it would have been maybe thinking, you know, to have had a bit of process on how we allocated that, priorities and things. You know, had I thought that we'd have 300,000 extra at the end of the year, I wouldn't have been so keen on cutting our education budget a year ago, for instance. So I do think there's a bit of a question about a sum as much as that, you know, being allocated outside of our budgeting process, so to speak. But we are where we are, and I see no point in delaying. But it does mean that all of a sudden we've had to allocate, I won't say flash, allocate quite a lot of money quite quickly. And I had a couple of, is that the capital thing? I mean, some of those figures seem quite a lot to me, and the split between capital and revenue. I mean, two that caught my eye was the signage refresh and the fencing. And if you're in my budgeting system, replacing a fence is maintenance, not capital improvement, as is repairing signage. Maybe we have a different way. Property costs, you'd have thought, were capital, not revenue. Hey ho. But how are we going to spend 45k on signage? And are we going to get any financial return from spending 75k replacing fencing? I mean, my instinct would be that would be something that should come out of our collaborative project for as opposed to, or even countryside stewardship or something like that. And so, I mean, those costs seem to be quite high, allocated at quite short notice, and so I just thought I ought to have a bit of a chew about it.
Look, I'll perhaps just come back on those couple of points, then make some more general comments about our own internal processes around scrutiny on the outturn. So I think the first point about the 500k is fair comment. I think we took knowingly took a cautious approach to this in not seeking to include within our budget in the proposal that we submitted to NPA back in March. I guess there was a degree of knowledge at that time about the fact that there will be some additional funding. What wasn't clear at that stage was how it might be split between revenue and capital, or whether or not it might be consolidated within the bottom line. That said, I think we may well have learnt a lesson there that we could look for in future years if we do have a degree of intelligence that gives us confidence to know that we're likely to get some additional funding. Looking forward into the next year, we'll be theoretically into a new comprehensive spending review round post, we presume, a general election. So I think there's a high degree of uncertainty around what our settlement may well be from March 2025 onwards, but we'll use our best endeavours over the course of the next year to gather as much intelligence as possible so that when we make a budget proposal, we're doing that with as much of a degree of confidence. I think secondly, I mean, absolutely, members are entitled and right to ask questions about how some of those figures are derived. In terms of the signage, this is the second phase of signage at Sutton Bank, which wasn't incorporated within the proposal that members made or approved this time last year for some additional signage. Some of it is relatively smaller directional signage within the site to help direct customers towards the nature hub and towards the cycling trails. We've noticed that there is a degree of confusion when people are navigating the site about their ability to get around. The biggest one, though, is the main road sign that you hit when you get to the top of Sutton Bank. It's now quite out of date. The branding is inconsistent with our new branding. It's quite a big sign, and that accounts for a reasonable chunk of the capital cost that's associated with signage. I mean, like you, Jim, I've also kicked the tyres on the Lewisham fencing replacement, especially to the extent that we might be able to square some of that away within either countryside stewardship or another scheme. But I'm pretty reassured in Bryony's absence that we're not able to do that, and we've got some reasonably accurate information around the costings on quite a difficult bit of land to access and get grazing to, and we need to have grazing to that site on account of the conservation status of that land. I'm sure we can provide additional information and more detailed information from Bryony's team just to kind of quantify that in a little bit more detail, but we have applied a degree of scrutiny to that number and whether that should form part of this proposal as well. But we know it does need replacing. I think more generally, I mean, Malcolm asks the really important question here, which is to what extent, both in terms of core revenue, but also in terms of project spending, this was knowable at Q3. And although we have been hampered by some things that we weren't able to factor in, particularly the weather, certainly it's been a cause of concern for me that probably some areas of surplus we could have anticipated better, and therefore we're taking steps to improve our systems and processes, which are already reasonably robust, to make sure that we avoid this kind of situation in future. In particular, we'll be applying a bit more detailed scrutiny through directors in terms of the conversations that take place at the quarterly forecast that happen between finance and budget managers. I think having a bit more director involvement in those with members of staff will help to ensure that more questions are asked around the robustness. We put in place some mechanisms towards the end of last year around project management to ensure that we're getting better quality of information about the RAG rating and status of projects. I'll be looking to enhance that as well to make sure that the information that we're getting financially and the information that we're getting about project performance tallies together, because there was a little bit of disconnect between that. I think that the final bit as well is that it's highlighted that there's a little bit of a need to improve the way that we support some members of staff around profiling. And so we'll also be doing a little bit of one-to-one support for individual members of staff, particularly newer budget holders who we think would benefit from a little bit of additional support over and above the support that we provide generally to staff from a finance point of view. So I'm really keen that we do tighten up a little bit our processes on the back of this information.
Any more?
So, just quickly come back on that, Chair. I hear what you say. I just worry that for instance, that could wipe out our profit on Levisham for another 2 years, couldn't it? Just replacing the fence. So we do need to be mindful of what sort of return we're going to get for that sort of, I don't know what benefit conservation grazing will bring, but I'd just like to know that we weren't just tipping money down there for maintenance that we were never going to get a quantifiable benefit from. Being a farmer, it's sort of quite close to my heart. And also, it's fortunate, I'm pleased to say that we're able to maintain some maintenance of our rights of way while we think about the future, and it's good to see that in there. I know from members who were concerned about that's helped smooth progress, hasn't it? So fortunate to see that, and well done for putting it there.
Thanks, Jim. I did think we saw the conservation grazing up in Cumbria, was it, when we went up there on the day trip, which, if there wasn't decent fencing, those cattle wouldn't have stopped within the area. So, is it similar sort of thing that we're doing on Levisham, that we need the fencing, otherwise the stock won't stay in the area they're supposed to. Yeah, I mean, it's all right, they're trying to fence sheep off the road, but if the fences have gone, then there's more on the side of the road, isn't there?
I don't have all of the detail in front of me on the precise parcels of land, but I know it's not on the main bit of the estate itself. It's on some of the really tricky to access farmland that extends south in the Dale and Newtondale around Farlath, and it's triple SI, I think, species rich grassland that requires an element of grazing on it in order to retain its status, and we're struggling to get a grazier to come and graze that land. In part because what fencing was there is now redundant. So that's what I can say about the particular site in question. I think for areas like that, the ability to generate a significant return on investment just on that parcel, I think, is always going to be really challenging. Looking at the wider estate, definitely, we need to use the Lincoln Levisham project to look at how we can ensure we deliver the vision that we've got for Levisham in a way that's ultimately going to be remunerative for the authority as a landowner. But I think this has been quite location specific on a little bit of the estate. It's just really, really hard to get anybody to take a commercial interest in grazing, but we have responsibility for it as the landowner.
Right, thanks, Tom. Right, ladies, gentlemen, we've given this a fair airing. There is a proposal on the table. Will anybody second the proposal that on these 4 recommendations from 20.1 to 20.4? Thank you, Malcolm. Can we take a vote on those? All in favour? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, George. If we move on then to the item 10, which is the quarterly performance scorecard. Due to the last carryover, I think there might be a couple of questions for Paul when he's finished. But it's up to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. This is the regular update to our performance scorecard. You may remember it was subject to some discussion at the last meeting, so it has changed since the last meeting. We have trimmed down the number of key performance indicators in there. We've tried to really concentrate on the ones that give rolling performance information quarter by quarter that really kind of test the health of the authority and how it's getting on. We've also changed the way it's presented. We had a request for more textual data, so we've tried to present it in a way that's consistent between all the indicators, and it's showing quarter by quarter information for the last 2 years. So now 2 years into the end of the business plan period. In terms of how we're getting on against those indicators, the only one that we're adrift on is volunteers. We've got some issues around the robustness of our volunteering information. I don't know if Ian wanted to chip in at that point.
Thanks, Paul. Around our volunteering input, I think the way in which we currently measure our numbers doesn't give a fair reflection of the volunteering effort. And since COVID, we've seen a number of changes to the way in which our volunteers want to volunteer and the way in which we deploy them. So prior to COVID, we had quite a significant number of voluntary rangers who were working long days. We have fewer of those now. We have the same number of active volunteers, but what we do with volunteer hours is convert them into 7.5-hour working days, which I don't think gives the true sense of how much volunteering activity we undertake. Lots of what we want our volunteers to do now is short-term 2, 3, 4-hour stints. So what I intend to do in future is give you numbers of active volunteers, continue with the number of hours of volunteering work, but also say that the number of days on which volunteering has taken place. And then I think those three between them, with some anecdotal evidence about what our volunteers are getting in terms of benefits for them out of volunteering, will give a better flavour than just a raw conversion of volunteer hours into full-time working days.
Just really to conclude from my point of view, so this has been evolving over time. It's only useful if it's useful to you as the committee. So happy to take any comments on format and what we've included, or if there's anything missing.
George?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to ask about the volunteering, because it is better to have a more rounded view of more rounded view and better understanding of the contribution that our wonderful volunteers are contributing to the national park. But I think the key thing here is the changes from one quarter to another rather than the figures themselves. So I think if that is maintained, I think that's the key thing, so that if there are big changes either way, we can spot them. And although we're moving to new criteria, maybe going forward, at least for a transitional period, if we can still see the changes versus the old metrics.
I'm really happy with that, because we're continuing to count that anyway. And I think some kind of count and getting a sense of the volume of volunteering activity is really important. It's just that sort of raw number of hours doesn't quite give us the full flavour of what's going on, or the breadth of work that our volunteers are doing.
Yes, so the additional information we're getting is on top of what we are receiving now, which we will continue to receive, hopefully.
Yes.
Thank you.
Could I just say before we move on, I have been on 2 or 3 of these volunteer days, and those volunteers need a commendation for the work they actually do. Because I know I was tired, put it that way. You know, it's pretty hard going, like, and a lot of these guys, they're retired from their normal day, and you know, they'll put in 2, 3 and even 4 days a week just for volunteering at National Park. I know it's, you know, they enjoy walking in countryside and they enjoy bringing footpaths up to date, so that this is what I did and this is what I did, you know. But they really are a brilliant set of workforce that actually work for us on a volunteering basis, and I take my hat off to them anyway.
Yeah, it was just on the volunteering, and I'm a little concerned that maybe we've taken our foot off the gas a little bit on actually facilitating volunteering and trying to expand it, because the last forum we had a really good talk about health and well-being, and some great green shoots, I should say, are being put in place as to how that might develop. But I just feel that we're short of capacity on doing that. When you look at the allocations we just made in the previous item, it would be great if there was something in there that would boost volunteering and shore up those numbers and get more volunteers from places that we haven't been before. Because volunteering is the biggest vehicle to our health and well-being output, and we get them twice, don't we? We get volunteers to come and help us do good work in the national park, which has a value that we don't have to do ourselves. And then we can count the uplift in health and well-being that they get from coming to do that. And so I think that they're a fundamentally key component of delivering our health and well-being objectives, of delivering our second purpose, and from getting stuff done in the park. So, and it takes resource. Volunteers do take resource, but that's what delivering health and well-being is about, and that's how we're going to do it. We're not going to do it by conservation grazing. We're going to do it by getting people involved, so I know it's no good sort of just putting resource where you haven't got the capacity to swing it, but this time next year, I'd love to receive a big chunk of that windfall going to boosting our volunteering and health and well-being output. So I just think this subject particularly, working with those people, it does take work and it does need resource. And we said we would make this project based, and I just worry that maybe we haven't got enough gas in this tank. So if this is a symptom of that, I'd be really concerned. Maybe it isn't.
And thanks for that, Jim. I mean, you're absolutely right. Volunteering effort doesn't happen on its own. It generally needs paid staff to organise it and facilitate, notwithstanding the excellent work that our volunteer task day leaders do. And in terms of increasing capacity generally, expanding that group of task day leaders, it is something we're working hard at behind the scenes. And Ellen will talk in the next agenda item about our external funding bids, and certainly wherever we can, where it's sensible to do so, we're putting something in those bids around volunteering. And you're absolutely right that the health benefits come in bucketfuls from encouraging people who might not naturally think of volunteering with us, and that takes a bit of time and effort. Retirees, really important to us, but they tend to come to us, and so they're a relatively easier group to work with. But there are others who we do need to put time and effort into.
And targeted transport, that's something we need to get a grip of to facilitate reaching places you haven't been before.
Is there any more? Go on, Malcolm. Malcolm first. Sorry, Clive.
Yeah, a couple of points. I mean, on volunteers, we're really proud of the work that volunteers do, aren't we? And quite rightly too. I mean, just get the numbers. The numbers have been changing things the last couple of years. I remember we used to talk about 10,000 volunteer days or something, and then we came back and said, oh no, we're not measuring it right, we'll do it differently. So we did it differently. And now we seem to say we're going back to something, which I think is okay, but let's just keep it constant from now on. So, and funny that's what Jim says. I mean, we're proud of what they're doing, and if we can put additional resources in for them to do more, then let's do it wherever we have them. Just another general comment. I mean, overall it's great because it's all underway and on target. But it just makes me think, previous item I was talking about some of the some of the work on the external stuff clearly wasn't going all that well. Nothing came up on these reports to tell us it's not going very well. And I think as in addition to just these numbers, I mean, I see this report as just a basic officers telling us as members in a formal way what's going okay and what isn't. And I've said before, in some ways it sounds as though I'm asking to be spoon-fed, but on the other hand, just from the numbers here, doesn't give me the information I actually want. You know, if 6 months ago you'd have said there's one of these external things that's going to be £1 million less than we told you a few weeks ago, then I'd quite like to know about it. So, and it's not just you, Paul. Clearly, you're the front man on this at these meetings, but there's a lot of other people feeding you the information. So I think it's just a general point about how we do things. And just a bit pernickety, I had a brief word with Chris. Under planning, you've got 6 appeals dismissed, 3 appeals allowed, and somehow you get a 70.8% average. There's something in the maths wrong there, but never mind.
So on the first point, the same point came up with the training we've run last week about particularly the external projects, and Pete's agreed to talk to me about next scorecard and incorporating something on that. I can't immediately explain the discrepancy. The calculation actually looks right in my spreadsheet, but I'll need to go away and have a look at it.
It's 66.6.
It's Excel's telling me it's right, which is weird.
Clive, do you want to?
I'm just going back to the volunteering thing. Do most of our volunteers come from within the parks area or outside? What sort of proportion is there? I was only thinking really because if you're within the parks area, say in Leland or something around that area, you'd want to do your work within that area. So I was just wondering what percentage it is.
The precise split I'll have to come back to you on because I don't know that. But what we do try and do is allocate work and volunteering tasks where it's most sensible in terms of travel, which is more complicated to do than I've just made it sound. But it makes no sense to have people volunteering who live at the northeast of the park and have them volunteering at Sutton Bank, for example. So we do work hard around that to make travelling a little bit easier.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm actually coming back to the point that Malcolm raised, which is what I was going to raise myself. In fact, is that the whole point of this is to help us understand how we're doing. I don't expect it to tell us how good we're doing. I actually expect it to tell us where we might be falling short, and it's again a bit of a cause for concern for me that it's not highlighting those kind of weaknesses or shortcomings in operational performance. So we've massively iterated it back on the basis of the feedback that we got from the last FRAS about keeping the formats a bit simpler, stripping it back to kind of key management information. There are 2 KPIs that I'd like to add into this. One relates to a financial KPI that's matching spend against project profile, so that we're actually tracking that on a more consistent basis. We are, but we're kind of doing it in the background. I want to put it in the front of ground through putting it into the scorecard and giving it a RAG rating. I think the second relates to the collective information that we're getting about project delivery. And so we already have a mechanism by which we're actually gathering the red, amber, green or RAG performance of projects and how we're doing on a quarterly basis through our project manager, Mark. And so what I'd like to do is actually bring an aggregate of that, sort of more kind of simple headline into the scorecard that basically says collectively how we're doing in terms of project delivery and how many projects have we got that are green, but also how many that are amber or red as well. And so hopefully we'll have a couple of KPIs in here that are still simple, repeatable, but actually helping to bring some of this information a little bit more apparently to not just members, but also myself as chief exec and the wider SLT.
Any more? Heather?
Thanks, Tom. I think we ought to be very proud of our volunteering. I really do. looking at that, okay, so we're sort of a little bit behind on target, but it's very challenging. I'd be very interested to know how other national parks compare to us, but that's not for this meeting now. I mean, if you read across the spectrum about what happens in other areas of volunteers, and regarding the fact that we must make sure they're trained, the health and safety aspect, and some of them probably a little bit resistant to the risk assessment, a way to do things. They're probably retired people thinking, no, I think it's very, very difficult to work with them and, and guide them in the safe practice. And it has happened in other areas. If you read the national press, as in some of these local railways situations, even the Lifeboat Society people, they're losing volunteers because they don't like this new direction of safety. We've got to look at that. It's very complicated that, to try and teach an old dog new tricks. And if we've managed to retain these volunteers, which we have, and it's good, and I think we ought to be very proud of that. That, as I say, nationally it's becoming more and more difficult to putting restrictions on the way they do things, and I don't think it's downbeat. I think we've done an excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Just one point I was going to make. Back before COVID, I know there was 2 or 3 guys in my village that would go volunteering, and they were setting off at 8 o'clock and going with the ranger team, where now there's more a case of we'll have a project day and do a bigger project where we set off at 10 o'clock or past and go through till 3, where they were going from 8 till 5 and, putting the full day in, which makes a lot of difference between the hours that's worked and probably the amount of work that gets done. But it was just something I'd picked up on, but whether that has a lot to do with the hours and days worked, which it probably has, then, we can't knock it, because our volunteers are hard-working lads, and lasses for that case. But thank you. Any more questions? If the recommendation, members, is that we note the scorecard and the updates that's been proposed to come in on the next scorecard, and it'll be August. Yeah. All in favour? Thanking you. If we can move on to item 11, which is external funding, which Ellen will fetch us up to date with all that's going on.
Good morning, just about. So yes, just wanted to present the external funding paper. I won't, labour the point around the change in spend over the next financial year, but just wanted to point out that the target for external funding has been met for the last couple of years and is on target going forward into this financial year, but mainly due to the change in spend profile. So in table 1, so the graph, which is quite a good sort of picture of where we're at the moment. The funding submitted is the grey area, so just to give you a profile of what it's looking like going forward. This doesn't include potential funding that we will be applying to this financial year. It's just those funding applications which have been submitted to date. So a lot of work is going to be focused on for next financial year and onwards. But just to give you a sort of snapshot of what we're working on and what has been submitted so far. As you know, we've been working on the Arts Council England funding application, and in the report I've put a link to the video that we submitted with the Arts Council application. It just gave a different sort of way of submitting an application to give it a really good view of what the landscape looked like and where we're at with our arts partnerships. So I do encourage you to watch that if you can, because a lot of work was put into that, and it's a really nice way of representing the project. This was submitted, and then the Arts Council have kicked it back just with a few comments, so we are due to resubmit that this month, and that's just for £35,000, but will be a great impact if we are successful. Another great partnership example is the Rosebery Topping project. So we are in the process of submitting application to the Landscape Enhancement Initiative, which is the national grid money that we're very keen on securing. We were successful at at expression of interest stage, and we're working really closely with the National Trust on this. So my equivalents in the National Trust are helping support that application, which is quite big. So that's around £300,000 to support the restoration and repair of the routes around Rosebery Topping. And then moving on to successful funding that we have secured recently since the last FRAS meeting. The River West Connect, so Reconnect lottery application was successful. So the whole project costs 1.7 million, and the lottery are contributing a 1.12 million contribution towards that project. This is really good sort of win for the national park, as we haven't had funding from that lottery provider previously. And we've gone on a real journey with the lottery. So initially it was rejected at expression of interest stage. So we worked very hard on the feedback, working on what they told us, and resubmitted that. Were obviously successful. And just going back to your point, Jim, about volunteering, this is a really good example of putting a lot of resource into boosting volunteering. So lots of citizen science, lots of engagement with people, and lots of funding and resources to make sure that our volunteering is boosted. And that's also through corporates as well as the everyday volunteer as well, which would be great. And it's the first time that the lottery have accepted for us to have a contribution towards our overheads. So about 10% of the grant will be towards, covering our core costs, which would be great, because as our resources are stretched, as we build up new projects, it's important that our core funding is taken into consideration. And a little snapshot of the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan funding that was successful for £100,000. And then into the future, so as I say, this doesn't take into account the grey areas on the graph, but we are working across departments through the authority on a really large heritage lottery application. So the heritage opened up a new strategy in April, so we have jumped on their bandwagon, and it meets the authority's business plan and the management plan outcomes really well. So we are putting in an application to them this month. So this week is the sort of main deadline for that. So an expression of interest will go into their programme, and it will encompass lots of different aspects of what we are trying to achieve through the authority, such as connecting corridors for people, but also for nature, using the rights of way and the coast to coast and the Cleveland Way as those sort of pictorial sort of landscape connections, which would be really important. And again, that has a really lovely volunteering emphasis in that as well. So making sure that more volunteers are coming to us and our partners to improve the landscape. And then I've given a small list of other projects that we're working on at the moment. Just wanted to point that the observatory at Danby Lodge, we're currently working on that as a top priority. So there is a funder called the Wolfson Foundation that we're submitting an application to them by July for the observatory, which hopefully will happen. And then we have the usual table of funding applications that have been submitted and waiting a decision, funding applications that were unsuccessful, and those that have recently been funded. Just a correction on the raiding the bank figure, it should actually be 280,000. It's down as 137, so that was my error. So just to make clear that that's different. And also one that's fallen off the table is the Champion National Parks for Everyone. So we secured 131,000 for the Mosaic project, which is working with the Peak District in the Dales. And then just for a different sort of inclusion into the report, I just wanted to show you where the distribution of funding has actually come from. So last financial year, we put in a total of around £5 million worth of funding applications, and that was mainly since October. And we were awarded 4 million of those, which was a good success rate. And it just gives you a picture of where that funding will come from, and that 4 million will be spread over the next few years. And it's quite a healthy sort of separation of funders. We're not hugely reliant on one particular funder. And then we wanted to show you that actually small levels of funding have a really huge amount of impact, even though, you know, they're under the millions, you know, they're into the sort of 20, 40,000. Just wanted to highlight a few projects that have been hugely successful over the last year. One such is the Watervole project that was actually on Sky News. So our ecologist was interviewed on the news for that project. A really lovely way of surveying watervoles was using the detection dog, and I'm sure you've seen the picture in the press of the high-fiving of the dog. And then we have the BMW project, which is a fantastic project working with volunteers that are sort of in the age of sort of younger children going into volunteering as an adult, so supporting that process and transition into adult volunteering. And then our woodland trainees, it's changed the lives, apparently, of a couple of our members of staff who are woodland trainees, and it's only been 40,000 over a year, but it's made a huge impact on them being able to, you know, get some solid work experience with, of course, a very good organisation. So that was mostly everything, I think, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ellen. That's certainly looking at all aspects of which way we go and direction, etc. And good luck with this multi-million one that you're just putting in for, which, yeah, it's seems like a lot of work going forward as well, to be fair. So, so good luck with that one. But any questions? Right, go on, Jim.
Well, it wasn't really a question, just thank you to Ellen for calming me down about saying volunteering so many times in your report. I didn't count, it must have been about a dozen. but no, it is good. Good, so I wish you well. Great work. I know we talked about sort of how many volunteers others have. I'm a little bit out of touch, but the last time I think National Parks England did its kind of valuing national parks report, I think they had sort of 40 or 50,000 volunteer days a year worked, and well over half of those were worked by the North York Moors alone. So being average would be a disaster for us. But it just shows what you can do. You know, if we can make visitors into volunteers, then we get so much more value for everybody. It sounds like you've got great projects in the pipeline.
Any more comments for Ellen going forward? Go on, Malcolm.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just thanks for the usual thorough report. And it's really good to see the amount that's in the pipeline. But I suppose not wishing to repeat, but slightly repeating. I mean, I tend not to look on FIPLA as an external thing the same way other things I've said that before. And so actually in 23-24, the amount we've spent on projects has gone down, which is unfortunate, but not quite in the direction we wanted to go. But then you get this huge increase that we've been talking about. You know, I mean, we're not going to deliver that, are we? I mean,
Yeah, well,
I'm not expecting an answer now, but we need to be watching that space, because that is a massive shift in resources. So look forward to hearing what or seeing what the numbers are like, you know, another 3 months' time.
I think when you see it as in a graph like that, it's quite shocking, isn't it? But also we are, really conscious that it is up to each project officer and myself to negotiate with the funders as well about the deadlines for that spend. So whether that can be moved past the March 25 deadline is a possibility. So, but we'll keep an eye on that. That's my external funding sort of viewpoint. But otherwise, project management wise, we are keeping an eye on it.
But the serious point, it does come back to reality, and for whoever's giving you the information to, well, I'm just expressing a bit of doubt that, I mean, if you can manage to push it forward another year, that's the obvious way to get around the problem. But I'm just saying it doesn't look realistic at the moment. So, good luck.
Any more questions for Ellen? Well, thank you very much, and can you pass on our thanks to the all the staff working with you to help put these projects together, because I know there's a lot of work goes into them, and well, the amount that we've come through and forward our projects, then it has to be a hell of a good project to come out on top. It's not a 10-minute job to write a couple of lines and send it in. So thank you very much anyway. Now the recommendation that members approve the contents of the report and agree current work being done to secure external funding. Is all in favour of? Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you very much for your report. If we move on to item 12, which is the annual Treasury Management and Prudential Indicators outturn for 23-24, I'll leave in your hands, Pete.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is the report we bring each year that just shows the outturn position around the Treasury Management area. So there's two elements to Treasury Management key areas. One is external borrowing and the other one is investment. External borrowing, we still don't have any at the end of year, which is as we expected within the Treasury Management strategy. And in terms of our prudential indicators in here, there aren't any breaches of those. I guess the other area I'll bring attention to is one we've already talked about in financial outturn, just around the interest level, which was 382,000 was the return that we made in year at an average of 4.98%, based on an average daily cash balance of about 7.6 million. And that's all for me, Chair. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Questions for Pete?
It's always quick.
Pete was keeping it very
brief.
Presentation. Now, come on. No questions. No questions, Malcolm. Malcolm.
It wasn't going to be a question. The reason I'm laughing, 7.6 million daily rate. I mean, balance. Ooh, good grief.
Yeah, I mean, things like Section 106, we've got the Bulby agreement now, we get some of those funds in advance, we get DEFRA funds in advance as well, external funding, some of those too, so where we do get that obviously helps with the cash balances through the year. But yes, that doesn't necessarily reflect the amount of money we have available. The correlation between reserves and that is yeah.
Any more Go on, Tom.
I was just going to add as well. I think it's a conversation that Pete and I have been having as well as we're probably due a bit of a look at our reserves to make sure that they're up to date and accurate, because we've got a number of ring fences in there, and I do wonder whether we ought to be doing a little bit of consolidation.
Yeah, I think just to emphasise on up to date and accurate, they are accurate, but whether or not they're going to get used or not. Yeah.
Not Freudian slip.
When they're as accurate as that, we do get more interest on them, so we can't grumble too much. Right, gentlemen, ladies, sorry. Recommendation that members note the performance and treasury management operation during 23-24 and the outturn position on prudential indicators. All happy? Thank you. Thank you, Pete. If we can move on to item 13, health and safety.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be brief on this. Just wanted to mention in part 3 of the report, sickness absence, and I reported throughout last year that our numbers were looking promising there. Really pleased to report that we're well under our target for short-term absence. And I've previously presented comparators at this meeting around comparing us with other organisations around the country. And again, we've performed strongly in terms of our sickness absence levels, which should be an indicator of how content generally I think staff are here. On to something completely different, the construction design and management regulations, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but these are important regs for us to get right in terms of our construction work. And under these regulations, construction work is anything from putting in the finger post to constructing a bridge to a major footpath construction. We've been really keen to have a sensible and proportionate approach and not overdo the bureaucracy on this, and our approach we've had in place for about 5 years. Over recent months, some of our external partners have been asking for more information than we've normally provided. So during the course of the summer, we're seeking some external advice about whether our approach to these regs is still sensible and proportionate. And I'm really, it's an area that you can easily go over the top and disappear into lots of bureaucracy, but equally we do need to get it right as well. So I'll come back to you on that. No significant accidents or near misses since we last met. A Unison member has got themselves qualified as a Unison Health and Safety rep and now sits on our Health and Safety group, which is really helpful. And in terms of our main item on our Health and Safety Action Plan, we're getting an external view of our health and safety in practice this summer, which is something we've not done for a while. So I'll bring the report from that back to this meeting in due course so that you can all have sight of that. And that's it for me, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Anyone want comment for Ian? It's all good. Right. The recommendation is that members note the contents of the report. And thank you very much, Ian. If everybody is private anyway.
We're moving into it.
Yeah. Item 15, which is the private minutes.
Sorry, AOB.
Oh. Item 14, any other business? I'll ask one. How's the playground coming on, Joe? Is it here?
Question.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I might get through the whole meeting without reference to Danby Lodge by your good self. The playground is virtually complete now. I think, as many of you may be aware, with the challenging weather conditions, we have had some issues in terms of the construction vehicles that have been used, and in particular one did get stuck to the extent that up until that point, our colleagues have been able to assist, but this one was well and truly stuck, which created a bit of a hole. Anyway, the main thing is we've been able to deal with that in an effective way, and the playground surface is now virtually finished. All of the equipment is in. The inspector for ROSPA, who are the people that will sign this off from an insurance point of view, is due to visit on Wednesday. There may well be some small, hopefully small, remedial works to do. So we will open it as soon as it's possible to do, but we certainly anticipate that being certainly before the end of May. There will be an official opening that will take place on Friday the 7th of June at around about 4:30 to 5 o'clock. An invite will go out to all members, and those of you that live locally, then opportunity certainly for you to attend. So more information will follow from that, but hopefully that will be a really positive moment when we can celebrate something that we can absolutely point at, because if any of you have been since the construction has taken place, you'll certainly see that it is quite a visual statement, and reliably informed by those with children that they can't wait to actually get on and play on the playground.
Thank you very much. Just before you run off, is overflow car park coming on okay?
Yeah. The overflow car park actually has been quite integral to the method statement with the playground construction, and actually it has held up considerably well with the both the location of the materials and some of the vehicles on it. What we're starting to find now is that where there is surface water, it's mainly puddling, which indicates that the drainage itself is working particularly well, and certainly we can indicate it. And the view from our area manager who oversaw the project is that it does look like it's worked, and that all that will need to happen will be for some rolling of the top surface once obviously it's dried, and hopefully actually after the last 2 weekends worth of really good sunny weather we might well be in that position to do that. So I can't give you an absolute certainty on that, but we're certainly looking even more optimistic than we were 6 to 8 weeks ago.
Thank you very much for the update. That's good. Go on, Clive.
Just back to the playground, I've had a lot of people, actually quite a few people within the area saying that it really looks exciting and that their children really want to be coming to play there. If that happens, it's a winner for us, because people would be coming back to the Danby Moor Centre. Thank you.
We need a winner. Thank you, George. Any other business? Before we move on to item 15, private minutes of the meeting held on 5th of February 24.
Check we're going off live stream.